Good evening, everybody. My name's Jonathan Rugman from Channel 4 News. My guest here, Suzanne Goldenberg from The Guardian. I was reading the International Herald Tribune this morning, and a couple of jokes about Hillary Clinton are doing the talk show circuit. There was one the other night that Hillary wants to reach out and touch women voters in order to win the presidency. And Bill's complaining and saying, well, when I try to do that, everybody complained. The other one that's going around is that this is a race of real contrasts. On the one hand, you have Rudy Giuliani, a pushy New Yorker with marriage problems, and on the other you have Hillary Clinton, a pushy New Yorker with marriage problems. This is what Hillary Clinton said about herself earlier this year. I'm probably the most famous person you don't really know. And I think that was quite an accurate summation. She is, apart from Oprah Winfrey perhaps, the best known woman in America and the least understood. Her reputation is as the most polarizing politician in America, apart from George Bush himself. The pollster Frank Luntz, a Republican pollster, once said to me, look, forget everything you read about American politics. Americans will vote for the candidate they would most want to be stuck in a lift with, or the person they would most want to have a drink in a bar with. And even though George Bush is a teetotaler, on both those counts, you can understand, I think, why he may have won 2 times around, though the first one very controversially. Hillary is the first First Lady ever to run for public office. I would suggest on the elevator front and on the drink in the bar front, well, maybe Barack Obama would be a more interesting choice. Yet Hillary is ahead in the polls for her party's nomination. Some in her party, one senior Democrat once said to me that it seemed inevitable that she would win the nomination, but that could be suicide for a party which deserves to win next time round after 8 years of George Bush. It's an exciting race because the incumbent is not running, and because we have the prospect of the first woman president, the first black president, the first Latino president, the first Mormon president. There's a lot to choose from. One of the traditional ways of deciding or judging who might win the race is something called the cookie contest. There's a women's magazine which every election year asks the spouse of the presidential candidates what their favorite cookie recipe is. And the readers of this women's magazine have to vote. And it's proved remarkably accurate. Laura Bush baked better cookies than Tipper Gore. Laura Bush baked better cookies than Theresa Heinz Kerry in 2004. It's interesting as to who would bake the cookies in the Clinton household if it wasn't Hillary herself. Now, the anecdotes and words most used about her: brittle, camera-wary, the mistress of scripted self-control. I've spoken to her a couple of times. On one occasion, about a year ago, I chased her up to New York State when she was campaigning. She was regal, she was distant, she didn't want to be bothered by me, that was for sure. And I did manage to slip her a question. I said to her, what is your political philosophy? Where do you come from? What are your views? And she said, I take solutions wherever I can find them. I'm a problem solver. That was her phrase. She does defy, I think, ideological description, and quite deliberately so. And the second time, well, actually the first time I met her was on the night of George Bush's inauguration in 2004. I thought I'd really reached the pinnacle of Washington society. I was invited to the house of her pollster in Georgetown for a party, and the Clintons were there. And I was so overawed and so amazed that I managed to get this far that I lost all journalistic pretense and didn't ask a single question, was very cowed indeed. Suzanne Goldenberg has no such problems. She's an extremely distinguished reporter. She's won the James Cameron Award, the Bayeux Award for war reporting, and she's now preparing for combat in the 2008 presidential elections. I thought what would be a useful way of starting would be very quickly to go through the chronology of her life to date, because there are, as I said, I feel that she is misunderstood or simply unknown on both sides of the Atlantic. Although we think we know her, we don't really. We know about her marriage problems, we know about Bill, but do we really know where Hillary's coming from? And then there'll be about 40 minutes of question at the end for you to ask Suzanne whatever you feel like asking. I heard you say the other day, Suzanne, that you've lost count of the number of times you've been asked whether you like her. Well, do you?
Do I like her? I don't think she's somebody I'd like to be stuck in a lift with, no. But after spending so much time looking at her, you have to admire the woman. You have to admire her intelligence, her grit, and the sheer fact that she has survived so much that is being thrown at her. And I also think you have to step back a little bit from the qualities that are negative about Hillary Clinton and from the fact that she's seen as abrasive, and wonder how much of that relates to Hillary herself. Excuse me. And how much is that something that we've said about all women in power?
Let's go back to the beginning. Let's just talk about her childhood, because she's actually from the Midwest, which might surprise you given that she's a senator for New York and obviously lived in Arkansas for many years.
Yeah, excuse me. I mean, Hillary herself likes to say, you know, that she had the honor or the good fortune to be born in the middle of a century in the middle of America. And obviously in the campaign now that she's using that to appeal to people, to say that she's an ordinary person from the middle of America. But she did have what on the surface looked like a very middle-class, ordinary childhood. She was brought up in a fairly affluent, I'm so sorry, almost entirely white suburb north of Chicago. It was a kind of community where the men went out to work every day in the city, the women stayed home and were homemakers. What's interesting, though, is behind this facade of normality, Hillary actually grew up in quite a brutal household. Her father, from all accounts, was curmudgeonly, a miser, and really quite brutal. I mean, there's a great story that she herself tells about how he wanted to impress on his children the importance of being frugal. And to do this, if any of them left off the cap on a tube of toothpaste, he would throw it out the window in the middle of winter in the snow, and they'd have to go and find it. He turned off the heat at night when it was, 10 or 20 degrees below zero. And he saw all of this as a lesson in self-reliance. And I think if you look at Hillary Clinton's life, you can see, well, she certainly is somebody who's resilient and can put up with adversity.
She was obviously very bright. She went off to Wellesley, an all-female college, and she was president of the college Young Republicans. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Her father was a Republican. She was a daddy's girl. I mean, she is the eldest of 3 children. She has 2 younger brothers who have never amounted to very much, I think it's fair to say. Her second brother had never really finished higher education. I don't think he got a degree. He's had some slightly shady business dealings. But she wanted to please her father, this very sort of withholding father. And so she was, by just automatically a Republican. It wasn't until her late teens where there was a Methodist pastor who was sort of opened up her eyes to the broader world, the world outside the white suburbs, that she began to think about where she was living and what was happening in America at the time. And you have to remember that was the 60s. It was the era of the civil rights movement, of women's liberation. So she began that process as a late teen. Then she went off to college, was separated from her family, and began to think much more on herself, by herself rather. And really, by the time she came to leave Wellesley after 4 years of her degree, she was no longer Republican.
So it's the Vietnam era. She goes to Yale Law School. There are over 230 students. Only 27 of them are women. She's one of them. And she meets Bill.
That's right. And that, to me, was another interesting period of her life, because I went out and talked to quite a number of the women who were at Yale Law School with Hillary, and these were a very select group of women. I mean, many of them told me that, they felt they didn't deserve to be there, that their fellow male students would say to them, well, the fact that you're here means that some young guy is being sent off to fight in Vietnam and could die. They all came from households where their mothers didn't work. They'd never known a professional woman, and they felt that they were really privileged and they had to do something with their lives once they graduated. That was the atmosphere. As well, they were all very ideological, very committed. They were getting involved in attempts to legalize abortion. They were marching against the Vietnam War. They were supporting the Black Panthers movement. It was a time of great struggle. And Hillary Clinton, although she was engaged with ideas, was described to me as somebody who was very focused and very pragmatic even then. And that's when she sort of stumbled on what she thought would be her life's calling, which would be to work on behalf of children, disadvantaged children, custody arrangements, adoption, things that were just beginning to emerge as an area of law. And she did something unusual in that, in addition to her law degree, she began to study at the Yale Child Study Center, and she did child psychology, and she did some pediatric courses. And that was unusual. I mean, that was a time when many women, young women, were running away from anything to do with children and the family. But that's what she wanted, and she thought she had found her calling, but she fell in love with Bill.
And just skipping forward in this brief resume of her life so far, she goes to Arkansas because of Bill. He wants to run for first Attorney General and then governor. And you write in your book that she didn't want to be First Lady of Arkansas.
She didn't know how to do it. I mean, this was amounted to embracing a kind of life that she had been rejecting. It was a ceremonial role. And it was the South, you know, the sort of, in terms of gender politics, women there were expected to have big hair, big blonde hair. To, you know, Bill Clinton's mom used to take an hour every morning to put her makeup on. Hillary Clinton wasn't even going to go out and buy a wedding dress. You know, her mother's finally forced her. I mean, she was not into the sort of overt expressions of femininity that were required in the South in those days. So the role of First Lady was very difficult for her. When she first came to Arkansas, she was a lady law professor, as they called her. And that was an academic milieu. She was much more comfortable. But there were certain demands of being, you know, the First Lady of the state that she found difficult.
When did she, I mean, there must have been this constant battle for an intelligent woman to know when to break out from a conventional Southern marriage and to stand on her own feet as a politician. Because you write that even at the end of the 80s, she was thinking about running for governor of Arkansas herself. But she looked at the polls and they told her that she was not liked, which is still an issue today, isn't it?
I mean, that must have been a real moment of disillusion. From the time that he was governor, her role really was to be the family breadwinner. As governor, he was not very well paid. She was, because of her upbringing and other reasons, she was very concerned about economic security. So she took a corporate law job, despite the interest in children. She worked for one of the big corporate law firms. One of her cases, her first cases, was defending a company, food manufacturing company that allowed half a rat, the back end of a rat, to be in some kind of processed food. I mean, that was her case. So she was just into making money to secure the family's future. And that was the deal. He would have the politics, the glory, she would make the money. But in the 80s, at one point, late 80s, Bill, who had been having affairs throughout the time that they had been together, I mean, even before they were married, began a relationship with a woman that was serious. And he seriously contemplated leaving his wife, getting a divorce, marrying this other woman, and even leaving politics. And that, for Hillary, was something she couldn't stomach, and she clearly felt just so deeply betrayed by this that she contemplated going into politics herself. That is, she was going to take the role that he had been doing. But they commissioned, I think, 2 polls, and they found out that people didn't like her. She had spent years and years in Arkansas. She had worked on government commissions to reform education. She had done all kinds of things in addition to the ceremonial role as First Lady, but people still didn't warm to her, and that must have been crushing for her.
And if this evening isn't about anything else, isn't it about why she isn't liked and whether she can overcome that? And isn't part of the problem that here in Britain we've had a woman Prime Minister and some. America never has. Over 40 countries have had women leaders. America hasn't.
That's true, and I think let's leave Hillary Clinton aside for a moment and sort of look at what the situation is for women in politics in America. At the moment, there's the women make up 16% of the members of Congress. That is one of the lowest ratios in the world, you know. And really, until 1986, there had been no woman elected to the Senate who was not either the daughter of a former member of Congress or the widow who had inherited the seat. No one woman without political connections or a member of a political dynasty had ever been elected. So even though we like to look at America, or we tend to look at America as a country of innovation, the country where the second wave of feminism sort of was born in the 60s, and when it came to politics and elected politics, America has been very backward. So that was the condition that Hillary faced and that other women before her faced. And one thing that I find interesting is that the whole issue of likability is something that has come back to haunt people like Geraldine Ferraro, who was on the ticket for vice president in the 80s, Pat Schroeder, who ran briefly for president in the 80s, Carol Moseley Brown, who was the first African-American senator and who was on the ticket in 2004. Many of the criticisms that are leveled against Hillary Clinton are criticisms that these women have also faced.
Is it about this issue of being commander-in-chief, which is very different from the leader position we have having number 10 Downing Street, that somehow America is a more militaristic society, and some people seem to have a problem with the idea of when you have to order airstrikes against Iran or wherever, they don't think a woman's going to have the guts to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, you are not only President of the United States, you're the leader of the free world, as George Bush is always saying. You are heading the world's last remaining superpower. And that had, I remember Geraldine Ferraro telling me that, people would she was conscious she could never cry, she could never show weakness, she could never show that she didn't understand the military issue. And when she ran, I mean, people were joking about, what if she had a bad day? What if it was that time of month? Would she be willing to press the bomb, to press the nuclear trigger? What if she had just had her nails done? Would she be willing to put her finger on the button? I mean, only 20 years ago. I mean, it's staggering to think.
So
but Hillary, I just wanted to say, Hillary has really managed to overcome that. And maybe she's gone too much the other way, but she is hawkish. So I really don't think there are that many Americans who doubt that Hillary would be willing to call in the airstrikes.
That may be the case, but isn't the irony with her that because she cannot cry, because it's okay for George Bush to cry when he's talking to some 9/11 widow, that this accusation of coldness comes from the very fact that she cannot reveal emotion because she's damned if she does and she's damned if she doesn't?
Yep, that's certainly true, but also it has to be said that Hillary Clinton, by temperament, is not somebody who's prone to emotional display. She was, born and raised a Methodist. She's somebody who's very disciplined all her life. She's not somebody who's very emotive.
The elections in America are won on television, however much handshaking and baby kissing that you do. Is there a script, a visual script for a woman to become President of the United States? You can't go duck shooting. Well, you can, but you probably wouldn't.
No, it's a huge...
What are the kind of matey things that you do on TV?
It's a huge liability for women, and many women politicians have told me that, because even when it comes down to what they wear, I mean, a male politician in America will wear a navy blue suit, dark suit, light blue shirt, red tie, sometimes a light blue tie. That is a uniform, and there isn't a comparable uniform for women. Until very recently, women staffers in the Senate, not the elected politicians, but the people who work for them, were barred from wearing trousers on the floor of the Senate. There is still no loo for women on the main floor of the Senate. I mean, it's a really hierarchical, a sexist environment. But when it comes to stagecraft, it's really biased against women. Because Americans like to see certain images of their politicians at work and at play. The at play images are very important. And so they like to see their male politicians doing manly pursuits, windsurfing for John Kerry, clearing brush for George Bush. Hillary, when she wants to unwind, she cleans out her closets. This is really not going to make for very good images.
I mean, this is presumably why, she said on national television, I'm not sitting here like some little woman standing by her man like Tammy Wynette. And you might have thought that would kind of garner her support, but it had the opposite effect.
It had the opposite effect. Tammy Wynette took it personally, which is something, and I think also, you have to bear in mind, that's why Hillary is so careful today, because she used to speak off the cuff and she always got in trouble. But that whole period of her life, that national soap opera of the 90s where the Clintons' marital problems were something we all knew more than we really wanted to. That's sort of in the past, and I think what's interesting to me is that many women, especially working class women and African American women, see her now as a symbol of survival, that she came through all that, she hasn't been beaten down, she's still proud, she's still out there.
Well, let's talk about the Lewinsky affair then, because You write in the book, I think the phrase what you write is she's been viewed as a chilly, calculating woman for much of her time in the White House, which makes her sound a bit like Lady Macbeth. But does the Lewinsky business change the dynamic? Is there some sympathy that starts?
Absolutely, and that is really, if you look at it, it's tragic, as in terms of personal achievement and what it says about how we view women in public life. Because here was Hillary Clinton, who wanted to be a modern first lady, however misguided, however however much she had a tin ear for politics. She wanted to reform health care. She wanted to play a modern role. She didn't want to just cut ribbons and plan banquets. All the time, you know, she tried to do those things. She was mocked. She was ridiculed. I'm not saying she handled everything well. She didn't. But she was never popular for doing those things. Then she's publicly humiliated. Her husband not only has this affair with Monica Lewinsky, he lies to the country and he lies to her about it for 9 months. Or she says he lied to her. And that's the only time that she becomes truly popular. That her popularity ratings soar when she's publicly humiliated in that way. And it's on the basis of that that she decides to launch the new chapter in her life, which is to run for the Senate.
But you can't become president on the sympathy vote from something that went wrong a long time ago. How is she doing at actually overcoming the accusations that she's distant, emotionally distant?
I think the main thing for Hillary Clinton now is that you have to respect her intelligence, you have to respect her, the fact that she's very hardworking, and you have to respect her experience. She has been a very able senator from New York. And for a lot of people, and even I spent some time in upstate New York talking to her constituents, and this is a very conservative area. And people said to me, look, I didn't vote for her first time around. I don't even like her, but I think she's good. I have to respect that. And I think that's what has to happen. She is trying to humanize herself, and she is succeeding to quite a large degree. But people, you know, have come to recognize that she is a very competent politician.
She stood up for firefighters and for those injured by terrible dust emissions from September the 11th. But I mean, otherwise, on her Senate record, let's put Iraq to one side for a minute, very cautious, centrist, unshowy, not much of a voting record to kind of get your teeth into.
No, no. And so you can see in that voting record that she didn't want to leave a trail that could be used against her later. You also saw that she was somebody who decided, I'm not going to go for any grand plans, I'm going to get things done, even incremental things. So that's something she took on board as First Lady when she tried to bring about universal health care in America, failed in a spectacular fashion, and then began to scale down her ambitions. She calls it the school of small steps. If I can just do one tiny thing, that's okay. So if you look at what she was doing in New York, it was really small regional economic initiatives. She was persuading fancy restaurants in New York to take wine produced in upstate New York. There was another project to get the apples grown in New York sold elsewhere. Very small local stuff. But you have to remember that this makes a huge impact on the daily lives of thousands of people. You know, that she was so willing to get involved, and that her office and her staff were so responsive to the concerns of ordinary people. I don't think that should be underestimated. She delivered. She delivered services. She made their lives better in very real and concrete ways. And I think that's one important achievement of her time in the Senate.
So the million-dollar question then, I suppose, is is rural upstate New York, is it enough of an image of America to translate? Because this is what her whole campaign is based on, that because, as you say, she had New York City within her grip anyway, she had to appeal to more conservative voters in a very rural state. She managed to do that. She won them over. Now she has to win the country with a whole Republican attack machine waiting to ensure that she doesn't.
That's true. But I think she's running on this image of competence. And as you say, it comes out in TV. So when you see her in these televised debates, she is the queen of the 30-second soundbite. She's crisp, she's clear. She really is very impressive in her performance. So if you see her against in this row of dark suits, against this row of men, you can't help but be impressed with her mastery of details. You know, I've been following her around, and I've seen her lots of times in these forums. And she just has a control of the details that is truly impressive, and you get the sense that she knows all the levers of government. She knows how to get things done, and I think if Americans are watching, that is something that's very appealing, especially, you know, because remember, within America, George Bush isn't just this politician who started the war and soured America's relations with the rest of the world. He has been an incompetent president. You know, the anger after Hurricane Katrina is very widespread and very deep. So the idea of somebody who can get things done is really attractive.
What about, I mean, we think about 2004, and apart from the Iraq overspill, we think about the sort of moral majority being the crucial factor in re-electing George Bush. Where does Hillary Clinton come down on the big G's of American politics, God, guns, and gays? Because she's basically got an anti-abortion or she's not in favour of abortion, but she's equivocated essentially. She's said one thing or the other.
Not entirely. Well, let's start with gays, because I think this will surprise people. For all her caution, Hillary Clinton is really the most gay-friendly one out there. You know, she has the lesbian and gay community has been with her, and that to me is quite interesting because she's not upfront about it at all. But in quiet ways, she has reached out, she's gone to gay and lesbian forums at a time when other politicians have not wanted to be associated with those kind of groups. Now, don't get me wrong, Hillary Clinton does not support same-sex marriage. She supports civil unions, you know, that small distinction. But she is seen as very gay-friendly. In terms of God, the surprising thing is how religious Hillary Clinton is. You know, when she was in Arkansas, she was teaching Sunday school. I went to some forum with her recently on religion, and her pastor, this Methodist youth pastor that she knew at the age of 16, was there in the front row. She's maintained that contact with him. So religion is important in her life, but she has, to her credit, I think, she hasn't made a huge deal of it yet, but no doubt as the campaign heats up, I mean, that's going to be to the forefront, that she's a God-fearing woman. They're going to emphasize that. On abortion, she has publicly, yes, she has, on abortion, she has done something that has really angered the women's movement, is that she has gone to an abortion rights rally, this was in 2005, and publicly said, well, I think abortion should be rare, I think we should find common ground with the pro-life movement. This angered a lot of people. What's interesting is that her voting record is always in favor of abortion rights, but publicly she has not wanted to take that stand.
So do you think it's something that will be used against her? I'm trying to think of, you know, if I was Karl Rove or whoever the next Karl Rove is going to be, you know, already dreaming up my list of things that I'm going to use to destroy Hillary Clinton, that I'm going to ram down the throats of the American people in 20-second television adverts night after night. What's it going to be?
Immigration. Illegal immigration.
What are they going to say?
They're going to say that Hillary Clinton wants to let millions, 12 million illegal immigrants who are probably criminals in their view, come into the country and drive, get driver's license to drive on American roads and, God knows, speak Spanish at McDonald's. You know, that would be the worst thing they could say, and you know, and I think that's going to be the issue they use against her.
And what about Bill? Because I mean, the remarkable thing is he left office with a 65% approval rating, in spite of Lewinsky case, incredibly high.
Some would say because of.
Where is he in the campaign? Is it a case of buy one get one free, or is she putting him in the background?
Well, I mean, he's had that famous remark where he says he wants to be first laddie, which officially he's going to be some kind of free-floating ambassador who will repair America's relations with the rest of the world. Unofficially, he's very important to the campaign. He has made a couple of campaign swings with her. He's made a couple of appearances on his own. He's had a book that's come out in this autumn, so he's been very public with that. They're using him very judiciously in a public way. They don't want him out there overshadowing her. They also don't want to sort of make this issue of dynasty very high profile. You know, they need to keep that on the back. You know, they don't want to make people think about that. But he's you know, he is a huge asset to her campaign. He's got a great political brain. He's a great strategist, and he has a great contacts book.
And when you try and talk to her friends about the state of the marriage, you hit a brick wall. They don't want to talk about it. The New York Times had this statistic about a year ago.
Yeah.
where it said that the Clintons were spending 14 nights a month under the
And that's
same
before the campaign started.
And that's before it started.
Yeah. So there's that. But, I mean, even broader than that, if you talk to any of the inner circle about Hillary and what she's really like, you get these answers back that are so scripted, so programmed, that it's really quite eerie, to the extent that people always say, you know, Hillary likes to laugh. And there was this great moment a few weeks ago where she went on every single Sunday morning chat show in America, all 5. No politician has ever appeared on all 5 at once. And on every show, Hillary, apropos of nothing, let out this huge belly laugh. You know, and it was a little creepy. And the other thing, people will say that, you know, Hillary loves to read. She's a voracious reader. And you say, well, what has she read recently? What does she like to read? And no one ever gives you a title, because that would be too revealing. So it is quite, she's a very opaque personality.
Before we talk about foreign policy, just one last one on the domestic side. Clearly we've had an election with a 9/11 shadow cast over it. The shadow will be slightly further away this time, but nevertheless still there, especially with Rudy Giuliani running. But what is going to be the signature issue for Hillary if she becomes president? I mean, Bush tried on immigration, he didn't get anywhere. Social security reform, he didn't get anywhere on that either. Is it going to be healthcare? Is it going to be Michael Moore's sicko? I mean, she failed in the 90s. She's obviously passionate about it. Millions of Americans without insurance. Is that going to be her signature issue?
She's made 2 big promises. One domestic, one foreign. And the foreign one is that she's going to get American troops out of Iraq, right? And that's nuanced, but that's her big calling card, that even though she was for the war at the beginning, she will now end the war, end Americans' involvement in the war. The second big promise is on health care. And her claim that even though she failed as First Lady to bring in health care reforms, that she is going to do this now.
Let's talk about Iraq, which for every politician, apart perhaps from Barack Obama, it's a problem. She voted in October 2002 to give Bush the authority to go to war. So did a lot of other politicians. But she was very late in expressing regret. She was sticking, a bit like John McCain, to the hope that it was all going to turn out okay in the end. And something she said that she quoted in the book, it seemed to me rather hypocritical. She says, if I'd been president in October 2002, I would never have asked for authority to divert our attention from Iraq to Afghanistan, and I certainly never would have started this war. And yet she voted for the authority.
That to me was really interesting if you look closely at the reasons she gave for supporting the war, because she was reacting as if she was president herself. You know, she was a senator. She had been a senator for, 9 or 10 months, for a little over a year and a half by that point in time. And she was still thinking, you know, what would it be like to be in a White House and not be able to have freedom of military action? And that, you know, that wasn't her job. She was a senator. She should have been fulfilling that role. But she voted for the war. There's no question. And she knew, despite her protestations since, she knew that that vote would lead to war. I mean, everyone did. And if you read the comments of other senators who voted to authorize the war at that time, they were careful to say, this is not a blank check. We don't want a preemptive war. We have some doubts about what you're saying about weapons of mass destruction. Now, if you look at Hillary Clinton's speech, she didn't express any of those doubts. So she was either extremely gullible or extremely supportive of the war. You know, all those things were in play.
Well, what would she do if she were president? I mean, because everybody says we want to bring the troops home. Who doesn't? George Bush wants to bring the troops home. Everyone has a sort of nuanced version of the same line. So, you know, come January 2009, what's going to be different, do you think, if she's president?
Well, I think, actually, that's the sad truth. I think, you know, I mean, John Edwards, her opponent, is going around saying he'd bring them home tomorrow. Bill Richardson, another opponent, is saying he'd bring them home immediately. And it's quite clear that that's not going to be immediate, and she's sort of couched in all sorts of different ways. But she sort of says that within the first 90 or 100 days of her administration, she'd sit down and come up with a plan to bring them home. But she would leave troops behind to protect the Kurdish areas and other strategic things. So there's no one foresees that in 2009 we'll see all of the American forces out of Iraq. That's not going to happen.
And on Iran, I mean, people shouldn't wake up jumping for joy that there's not going to be some sort of conflict with Iran if Hillary's president, should they? I mean, no. Similarly, she inherits what she inherits, and
she's been hawkish on Iran. I mean, as we've seen in recent weeks, she was the only Democratic candidate, the ones who are running now, to actually support this resolution against Iran. So she would not rule out the use of force against Iran.
So, I suppose to sum things up, because I think we should take some questions.
Sure.
You clearly admire her. You think she's overcome some of the drawbacks. You think the American people have warmed her, I think, is what you seem to be saying. Do you think she's going to go all the way?
I want to step back. There's great, I admire, I have a sort of, I admire her, but I don't wholeheartedly admire her. I would like people to see Hillary Clinton within the context of the difficulties for women seeking political office in the United States. Some of the things for which we criticize Hillary Clinton are the things for which we criticize all women who seek higher office. And I think it's important to know that. I find her disappointing because I think the life choices she has made are those that are very conventional and very backward looking. And I have very deep problems with her vote on Iraq and her stand on Iraq and her shifting stand, which has been all about the opinion polls. But I do, as you say, I mean, I do admire her intelligence and her work ethic. She's very hardworking. And I admire the way that she has promoted the women around her and that she has been loyal to those around her and that she does seem committed to making things better for working people, for people on the minimum wage. And also for just delivering basic services to her constituents. So getting back to, can she make it all the way? Well, the atmosphere favors Democrats, there's no question. She is a front runner in the Democratic field now, but the voting starts on January 3rd. And she's had a bad 2 weeks. The last couple of weeks have not been good for her. She's beginning to falter a little bit, and so we'll have to see whether she clears that hurdle. If she does, and no matter who is a Democratic candidate, I think it's going to be a very tight race in November. But the odds are still, whoever the Democratic candidate is, I think they're favorite.
And who should she fear? Is it Barack Obama?
Barack Obama and, to a lesser extent, John Edwards in this first stage.
And they're debating tonight in Las Vegas, I think.
They are, and this is her chance to turn around and reverse the last 2 weeks.
Suzanne Goldenberg, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, any questions for Suzanne? Gentleman at the back.
I'm Charles Glass. Of all the Democratic candidates, which do you think would be the most formidable to face the Republicans in November?
I think she would. I think she would, because she does have, and she can claim to have had this bird's eye view of the White House. She spent 8 years in the White House. Now, she wasn't Al Gore. She wasn't a vice president. But she does have a level of experience and knowledge that none of the other candidates can claim. In addition to that, she has had, a term and a bit of representing one of the biggest states. She's also got, in terms of experience, her service on the Armed Services Committee. If you talk to generals in America, they love Hillary Clinton. They say that she really understands the issues. She's made herself an expert on defense. So I think, despite the negatives that come with Hillary Clinton, I think she would be a very strong candidate. She's also tougher than any of the others. She has been through her husband's campaigns and her own campaigns, and you know that this is a woman who, if she's attacked, will fight back, pick herself up, and keep on going. We don't yet know that about Barack Obama. He's still relatively new. He came to national politics in 2004. We also don't really know that yet about John Edwards.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Karen Robinson. I'm a Democratic Party activist, and in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you that I'm involved in the Barack Obama campaign. So I don't want to be accused of planting a question here. But I just was really interested. I was listening to what you were saying, and I found it fascinating because I came into this room really, very excited about my candidate, but really interested in learning more about the person who's the front runner at the moment. And after listening to what you've said, I've never been opposed to Hillary Clinton in any respect. I think she's a very admirable woman who's achieved a lot. And you've brought me very close to actually being against Hillary Clinton. I've just jotted down some of the things you said. She said she's the most famous person that you don't know. Okay, I'm interested to learn more about that. She loves to read, but she won't tell you what she reads. She's religious, but she won't talk about that. She supports gay rights, but she's not interested in being known for supporting gay rights. She supports abortion rights, but she doesn't want to talk about that. You can trust her on health care because she failed on health care in her husband's administration, and on the Iraq War, she was either extremely gullible or extremely supportive.
You should be working for the Republicans.
I'm just not clear on if I were to vote for Hillary Clinton in this primary, because I'm very involved in the primary. What would I actually be voting for? What vision is she presenting to the country? I'm genuinely interested in knowing the answer to this question. What is her thing that she wants to stand for outside of being a woman?
Well, I think what she stands for, and it's interesting what you said, because these are the things obviously that Barack Obama has been saying over the last few days, and they're true, and he has been capitalizing on them. But I think what she stands for is competence. And I think what you've seen in New York State is competence, and that she can deliver, and that she's a safe pair of hands. That she is not going to go off and, yes, she's hawkish on Iraq and Iran, but she also supports diplomacy. But that's the main thing, I think, the safe pair of hands and the competence.
Yes.
Hello, it's Corinne Evans. Thanks very much. That was fascinating. I'm just really interested. Everything that I've read about Hillary and everything that I've heard about Hillary is overwhelmingly about personality rather than policy, and even more so, I think, than we get in the so-called politics personality here in the UK. And I was just wondering, do you think that that's just modern-day politics? Do you think that that's something peculiar about American politics? Or is that sadly where we always end up when we have female political candidates?
I think certainly it's true because of female political candidates, and that we look at their hairstyles, and to an inordinate amount. And I thought this was just about Hillary, but Pat Schroeder, who ran in the 1980s for president, said that women would send in checks so she couldn't say, "Dear, go get your hair done," and things like that. So part of that is a liability of being a woman, that people are looking at you in all kinds of ways. They want you to be perfect. They feel that if you aren't perfect, you're letting down all women, that no one else will get a chance, which is absolutely ridiculous because no one's perfect. But I think the sad fact about American politics today is that every candidate is trying, especially, is trying to be everything, really. And and so when you look at the party platforms of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and John Edwards, there really isn't a very great deal of difference. If you look at their health care programs, they're remarkably similar. If you look at their other platforms, they're all for, universal education at age 4 and things. They're all very much of a muchness. And the sharp distinctions will come between the Democrats and the Republicans next November. And that will have to do with the issue of the war in Iraq and on immigration, I think. But yeah, that is, and basically, you can't blame Hillary. When you stand up and put your head up on this particular issue, when you put your head up above the parapet and say you stand for something, then you open yourself up for attack. A few weeks ago, she proposed giving each kid at birth a $5,000 bond that could be used for higher education or something later on. And she was immediately criticized for that by all her opponents. And so that has now gone off the table.
Just following on from that quickly, are women necessarily Hillary's best friends in the electorate? Because there's this YouTube video at the moment from a John McCain rally where somebody asks him, "How are we going to beat the bitch?" And the person asking the question is a woman.
That's true, but I mean that's one sort of myth that I sort of got to, is that women hate Hillary, that women have a Hillary problem. In fact, that's not true. Women do like Hillary Clinton, especially Gloria Steinem had this great line that, you know, women in nurses' shoes, comfortable shoes, like Hillary Clinton. Women who wear Manolo Blahniks, you know, those high-priced, high-heeled shoes, hate Hillary. So there is an income breakdown among Democrats, at least, that women who are more working class, more middle class, like Hillary Clinton. Interestingly, she also performs better among African-American women than Barack Obama. So she does seem, because of her hard personal life, there is a degree of identification with her. And also there's a tremendous amount of excitement among women just at the idea of a woman running. And really, it is this woman's vote and the woman's share of the vote that is making Hillary Clinton the front runner.
Right. Yes, sir.
The question I had was, when it comes to winning an election, I mean, the lady from the Obama campaign made some very justified points, but surely Hillary Clinton is the best candidate simply because she's got the best machine, the most money, the most experience of winning. I mean, the Democrats have had two maybe better candidates than George Bush, but they lost. And the Clintons are excellent at winning campaigns. And if the Democrats truly want to win in 2008, I don't feel that Obama, for all his charisma, has the strength to win. But you made that point about her being very resilient. And I think the Republican machine is so hateful and so nasty that you need a strong candidate. So do you believe that the media will be responsible for who gets into the White House as opposed to the people, if you see what I mean?
Well, certainly, you know, in this, except for Iowa and New Hampshire, which are the first states to hold primaries, it's not about personal contact anymore. It's about, you know, the ads you buy on TV. And I guess increasingly it's about YouTube and other things. So, yeah, it will be about the media, I think, to a large extent, because you physically, it's a big country and you physically can't be everywhere. But her campaign is so good, just really good at combating negative things. I mean, for example, I wrote an innocuous story, really, about Michelle Obama coming here for a fundraiser, and I mentioned that there were 3 events, including one for people who had bundled money, that is, collected donations from 10 people, you know, and these people got a special audience with Michelle Obama if they raised $23,500. And 30 hours after that story went up on the net, I got an email from the Obama campaign objecting to this because officially they don't bundle money together. They're not about big money. But it was, you know, I had the official invitation inviting people to that event. Now, I wrote something a few days later that the Clinton campaign didn't like. The phone call started within an hour of that story going up on the net. And because there were so many people in Clinton headquarters clicking on that story, a really tiny little 400-word story became one of the most read items in The Guardian. So they will fight back, and they're very well organized.
Yes.
Hi, Chris Anderson. We've touched on Obama and John Edwards specifically as competition, but I wondered who you thought would be the most likely, the most compatible, and perhaps most useful vice presidential candidate to run with Hillary in 2008.
I think that's one sad reality of American politics, is that Hillary Clinton will be seen, because she's a woman, will be seen as such a groundbreaking, revolutionary choice that she's going to go with a very safe running mate. Some of the names that have been mentioned have been Evan Bayh, who's from Indiana, and who's also sort of a dynastic figure, if you like. Mark Warner of Virginia, who would bring in Virginia. I don't see that one happening because there's a Senate race coming up and the Democrats could keep that. But I think, even though it would be attractive to some people and some people would like it, I think it's highly, highly unlikely that she would take Barack Obama as her running mate.
Edwards, perhaps?
I don't think so.
Would that be on the grounds that they're a threat to her in some sense? I mean, they're...
No, I think really Barack Obama, I think if you, if you're going to look at conservative Americans and an American South, having a white woman and a black man together on the ticket would just blow some people's minds.
Yes, there's a gentleman at the back.
Gavin Stamp. Obviously Hillary has raised a huge, and continues to raise a huge amount of money. Could you say a little bit about who's funding her campaign and who, if anyone, she might be beholden to if she does get to the White House, in the same way that Bush obviously was to the oil lobby and various other corporate interests?
You know, the thing about the Clintons is they are taking money from absolutely everybody. I mean, everybody. What distinguishes her contributors from Barack Obama is that they're larger sums of money. You know, they're not giving $50 and $100. They're giving the whole money, that, you know, at one place. There's been a lot of talk. I don't quite know yet. I haven't seen a really good analysis of showing what lobby she would be beholden to. It's not clear to me yet.
Yes.
Should she win, what change do you foresee in foreign policy? We've had a newly elected woman in Argentina, Mrs. Kirchner, who says that she's very close to Hillary. Is that true? And secondly, what kind of shift would you see, or would there not be, other than Iraq, which you've spoken about?
I think there would be. I mean, in some ways you're beginning to see that shift because the doctor already, you know, it's an institutional shift, but because George Bush's foreign policy has been such a failure that his own administration has begun to move away from it. So I think you are going to see falling back on diplomacy, falling back on international organizations. I think that she is, not only Hillary Clinton, but the U.S. Congress is much more interested in working together on the problem of global warming. So you're going to see that as a priority. It'll be interesting to me to see what she does on the Middle East. I mean, she's very interested in Israel and the Palestinians, and as you know, her husband tried to bring a peace there. I think she will be more engaged, but she has flipped her position on that issue. You know, as First Lady, she was much more supportive of the Palestinians than she has been as Senator of New York. So we'll have to see how that one develops.
Yes.
I had a question about your work as a biographer. I mean, obviously, many of the things that you've said probably didn't come as a surprise to you, that she tends to be careful in her public statements and that she perhaps isn't liked or whatever. These are things that you may have known going in. What are some of the biggest surprises in the time that you've been spending getting to know her? What are some of the surprises, other than perhaps you mentioned that she's a very religious person? I mean, that's a bit of a surprise to me, that she practices and so on. What else is it that really surprises you after the years you've been spending getting to know her and following her?
I think for me, I mean, is that if you remember the sort of image of Hillary Clinton from the 90s, it was this radical woman, radical feminist woman, or certainly the stereotype that the Republican and the right wing painted of her, is how centrist she has always been. You know, even in the context of when she was at Yale Law School. I mean, she was, you know, that she has never been a really radical person in any way. She's always been a moderate, and she's always been focused on pragmatic politics. That was something that came as a surprise to me. I also think her, how hard-working she was, you know, and her willingness to work hard really came as a surprise to me as well. You know, I went to, for the book, I went to this tiny town in New York State. It had a population of 2,000, and it's several hundred miles north of New York City. And they had an earthquake there, which is very rare, but they had an earthquake. And within like 3 days of that earthquake, Hillary Clinton came to the town, came and saw what people needed. You know, did they need their houses rebuilt? Were there cracks in their wells? Made sure her staff went back to see that everything was repaired. So her willingness to get involved and really work came as a surprise to me.
Yes, that lady over there.
Felicity Spector, I want to know what you think the fact that we have the first woman candidate for president, the serious front-runner candidate, potentially the first black president, Hispanic, Does this say something about the way America is today? Is this the first real election of the 21st century? The fact that all the candidates have been using very innovative ways of campaigning, using the internet, using YouTube, using bloggers, trying to reach out to young people, and that the Republicans have been very much struggling on that count and look more rooted in the past. Is this just an aberration, or is this a sign that America is changing, is more willing to accept a new kind of politics?
Well, I really hope it is a sign of change. You know, it seems hard to imagine that you can go back from here, and yet, you know, you did have a woman vice presidential candidate in 1984, and they've never put you know, there's never been one on the ticket again. But it is, I mean, it is just striking to see it, you know, as a journalist covering these things. You look at the field of Democratic candidates and all their diversity, and then you look at the Republicans, and it's a bunch of middle-aged white men, you know. But I'm hopeful that is, you know, that is the future that is coming.
Yes, this gentleman here.
My name is Robert Papstein. Question is, you say that her strength is in sort of step-by-step, systematic way of doing things. And I just wonder if that is the mood of the country now. Whichever candidates are in contention for the presidency, do you think that that's what the country is seeking, is a small step-by-step approach to things, or a little more dramatic and radical?
I think we've had dramatic and radical, you know, and look where it got us. I really do think that there is a sense that there's something wrong in America. And you can see that reflected in the opinion polls, you know, George Bush's, you know, historic low unpopularity. And what's interesting is that Congress has very low popularity as well. But yet if you ask about the individual members of Congress, their ratings are okay. So you have a real sense of disillusion with the way power and politics has been conducted. I think people want a respite. They don't want a new war every couple years. You know, they don't want, you know, people will tell you, you know, I'm afraid to go to Europe, everyone hates me. You know, they don't want to feel like that anymore.
Following on from that, a year ago I would have put my money on John McCain for the Republican nomination, because I was thinking, this has been a bitterly divisive time for America. We need a sort of grandfatherly figure who Democrats like, who could unite the country. That appears to have imploded. What's gone wrong?
Well, I sort of want to go back and say, you know, whether he's a fatherly or actually grandfather-looking figure or not, and whether Democrats like him, you have to remember that John McCain is a Republican, and for all the not funny jokes and everything, he is extremely right-wing. So don't be fooled. I think John McCain backed the wrong horse. I mean, he came out, he has been somebody who's advocated putting more troops into Iraq. He's been a strong supporter of the surge, an early supporter, even before the surge, you know, which is the increase of troops that happened last January. He was calling for more troops even before that, and that's just not something Americans want. They want Iraq over with. They don't want to send more troops there.
Yes.
Assuming Hillary gets the nomination, who would she most want to run against? Who would she least want to run against?
Wow. Huh. It's hard for me to know who she would want to run. I mean, because I'm sort of caught in this assumption that it'll be, I think it'll either be Giuliani or Romney. But in a way, you know, I mean, if you were to look at sort of the other one, I think for her, you know, I think she could beat Giuliani. I think, you know, that was a great matchup that was supposed to take place in 2000. She was supposed to run against him for the Senate. He pulled out because his marriage, that was his second marriage, was ending, and he was getting started on his third marriage, and he also had cancer. And I think also he knew he had doubts that he could beat her, and I think she could take him now. I think that his whole image of America's mayor is kind of brittle. I think she could take him. I think that she would have more difficulty against Romney in some ways because he does have a sort of warmth and charm level that she doesn't have. You know, Giuliani is quite engaging when you see him on the stump, but he is also abrasive. So Romney would be difficult. If you were to look at the other fields, Fred Thompson, the Law and Order actor, his campaign isn't really going anywhere. And also, he's not very hardworking. I mean, he does one event a day, 2 events a day. No, Hillary will do 4 or 5. I mean, she will just, you know, so she could take him as well. I think her biggest threat would be Romney.
Yes.
There's so much talk about Hillary being calculated and careful and a hard worker, sort of about being disciplined and moderate, right from Yale Law School right up until her campaign now. To what extent do you think, if she was to become president, we would see a sort of relaxation from her, sort of finally her being able to sort of show us what she really believes in? I mean, do you think that we would understand more about what her passion is and what, and more of her just ideological urges rather than just her being careful all the time?
I really, you know, I mean, she claims repeatedly in all sorts of ways that she doesn't have an ideological framework, that she is somebody who just likes to look at things pragmatically and in small ways and to get things done. But, you know, when you're in the White House, you can never relax. I mean, one interesting thing is to look at presidents when they go into the White House, look what they look like, look at them a few years later, how much they age. That is just not the time that you're going to relax. You know, you know, she's going to be more careful ever than ever before. But I think you are going to see, you know, if she were to get elected, I think you would see her taking on health care and really pushing there. And I think you would try and see her bring in some smaller legislation that would be good for women, especially low-paid women, things like that. Well, you know, he'll be free-floating as the sort of first lady and ambassador. You know, I don't think, you know, I don't, you know, and I don't think he'll be entirely absent from the picture. And I'm not sure she wants to be released from Bill. You know, I mean, I don't know what's going on in their marriage. I deliberately didn't try, you know, I wasn't interested in writing a book trying to divine what's going on in that extremely complicated marriage because there's been so many, and I don't know if any of them know what they're talking about, really. But, so I don't know. But I don't think that they would ever be, you know, that he would ever be out of the picture completely, because he's too much of an asset, really, politically.
Lady at the back.
Hi. In the last 2 weeks, part of her difficult 2 weeks has been her failure to answer a question about driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. And I know that some of her constituents in New York feel that having said a lot about immigration when she was running as senator for Senator of New York, she has now taken that off her stump speech and she's stopped talking about immigration. And I was wondering if you saw a place where she would come down specifically on immigration. If she would, where would she come down on immigration?
I don't know, because since I've been here, she's had another little policy shift, and I've just read it, you know, on the AP Wire, so I want to go back and see. But, you know, I mean, the broad, so I don't know what the particulars are now with her on the driving license issue. The broad brush, I mean, Democrats are for some kind of amnesty and some kind of program that you don't, you know, penalize all the illegal immigrants that are in the country, but you prevent more from coming in, where the Republican position is much more punitive. But on her specifics of her policy, I'm now pretty confused because there was a new statement just Tuesday, I think.
Yes.
Quite simply, do you think she'll win?
I don't know. You know, I'd be like hostage to fortune. The numbers are very close. They've been close for a long time. And elections are getting harder and harder to predict in America. And this goes back to your question about the blandness of political life. What's been happening over the last 20 years, the number of people who owe their allegiance to the Democrats or to the Republicans is shrinking. And you have a larger field of people who go back and forth, who are independent. And so that makes elections harder to predict. And it also encourages politicians to take more middle-of-the-road positions because everything's up for grabs there.
Just a couple more questions. Yes, over here.
Do you feel that her lack of charisma could be her undoing? Because at the end of the day, we're not all suckers for charisma. And is that not what they voted for Bill? And is that not what they voted for Blair? And is that not why Gordon Brown was not doing very well? Not glamour, but a bit of warmth and a bit of humour and a bit of charisma at the end of the day.
She actually, I mean, it's not like, you know, she's a total drone and a total, you know, she is good in small groups. She's in a room like this size, you know, she'd be totally charming. Everyone would like her. And she does have this great ability that she put to use in the Senate of making people like her in small groups. So she'd go to these meetings with the male senators and she'd get up and make them coffee. She throws baby showers for people. I mean, she's someone who's really good at making people like her in small groups. She's not a big picture charisma person. So I think she can get by that. But when you see her on TV in the debates or things, she is, you know, she just glows. I mean, she is pretty impressive. I mean, and that comes through. So I think she'll be able to get over that hurdle, that she isn't going to be the kind of person who would bring an arena to, you know, full of people cheering and yelling. You know, I think she can get past that.
Last question, perhaps. We're in Vivia's position here. Yes, sir.
My name is Bayeux. The question, George W. Bush has surrounded himself with good old boys, the Pearls, the Cheneys, the gang. They're strong people, and Bush obviously relies on them, or has relied on them in the past, to actually determine foreign policy and determine everything to do with American politics. So it's not the president, it's the people that the president surrounds himself with that surely is the secret of power. Has Hillary got those people, and who are they?
They're Hillary Land. It's called Hillary Land. And what it is mainly women who have been with her since her husband's first campaign in the early 90s. And they've been with her and they've risen up through the ranks. That's her core staff. But also in terms of foreign policy, she's taken on many of the people that were with her husband's administration. Richard Holbrooke, for example, was UN ambassador. Madeleine Albright and she are good friends. They talk quite a lot. So Sandy Berger, she's taken advice from. So she is surrounding herself from some people that were around her husband's administration, other people in the sort of Washington circle, and this coterie of longtime aides.
I'd like to give you some time to sign some books, and I'm sure you'll take individual questions as well from those queuing up. It's a wonderful book. It's called Madam President. It's massively short, in the best sense. It tells you all you need to know, and as we've heard tonight, Suzanne Goldenberg is a wonderfully proficient speaker on what's going on in America at the moment. Thank you very much for talking.